welcome. Thank you for coming and visiting my grave. My name is Mary Reinhardt. Well, that's my married name. I was born Mary Rebecca Harshaw. My parents were Daniel and Mary Harshaw. I was born April 20th of 1839 in Mississippi. I was one of 7 children. Now, I know that you're not here to hear about me. You're here to hear about my much more interesting husband, the Captain Augustus Michael Reinhardt, who's on this side. My husband, Augustus Reinhardt, he was born October 20th of 1825. He was born in Lincoln, North Carolina. His father was Colonel Michael Reinhardt. He had served during the War of 1812. His mother was Mary Reinhardt. There were a lot of Marys. They got a little confusing. He had 5 siblings, and then his mother passed away. His father remarried, and they had 3 children, so he also had those 3 half-siblings. In 1846, Colonel Michael Reinhardt moved the family down to Mississippi, and then in 1848, Augustus came up here to Hickory Plains and decided to become a farmer. We met and we got married December 23rd of 1856. I was just 17 and he was 31 at the time, but boy, he was just such a dashing man. Together we had 10 children. Sadly, one of our sons did not survive infancy, but the other 9 did, and they all lived very full and long lives. Now, the Civil War broke out, and my husband was elected to be a captain in the Confederate Army. So in March of 1862, he enlisted under Colonel Turnbull out of Arkansas, the 25th Regiment, where he was part of the infantry. In 1863, he actually moved over to serve under Colonel Monroe as part of the cavalry. While he was in the war, he saw many battles, several of which are the battles of Marks Mills, Lookout Mountains, Chickamauga, and Poison Springs. He also saw many skirmishes throughout Tennessee, Arkansas, and Mississippi. Thankfully, my husband survived the war, and he came home whenever the peace had been established. My husband was a farmer at heart. He had over 1,000 acres here, all of which, except for 160 of those acres, were here in Prairie County. Our homestead where we lived was about 600 of those acres, and about 300 of them were cultivated. We had a nice, large house, which you needed with 9 children. There were numerous outbuildings, but we were known for our landscaping. We had beautiful trees, evergreens, shrubs, hedges, but most notably, we had an 80-acre orchard where people would come from miles around to get our pears, plums, peaches, and apples. We were well known for having some wonderful fruit. We even had a large vineyard on the property as well that we would sell our grapes. Now, unfortunately, I died in 1881 and left my poor Augustus with all those children, some of which were still young at the time. I can only imagine that he felt overwhelmed having young children to care for. Now, I know it is not a nice thing to gossip, but would you all like to hear a little bit of a scandalous story?
Why not?
Yes, why not? That's the spirit. So, I can only think that poor Augustus was just a little overwhelmed, which drove him to this madness. In 1886, just 5 years after I had passed away, he didn't tell anybody of his intentions to take a new wife. Instead, he just hitched up his buggy and went down to Little Rock, where he married a Miss Sally Ryburn. He brought her back as Mrs. Sally Reinhardt. Nobody knew what to expect. They certainly weren't expecting that. Now, this new Mrs. Reinhardt, she is 40 years old at the time of their marriage, and nobody knew anything about her. She had her trunks that she brought with her, and when, they were helping her unpack, they did find articles of men's clothing in the trunks. So they assumed that perhaps she had been married previously, though nobody knew. Now, my children, they were just the most wonderful, lovely, devoted, and loyal children you could ask for, because they did not take to this new Mrs. Reinhardt. How could they after they had me as their mother? So anyway, at some point, she left. She didn't tell anybody. Nobody knows where she went or what happened to her. She just left the family. It was a shame. I was very cut up about it. My Augustus lived until April 19th of 1904. He was 79 when he passed away. He lived a very full life. So thank you so much.
Tell you what little or lot we know of James Carroll Patton, which is mine and her great-grandfather. He was born in Tennessee, but when the Civil War broke out, he was living in Bradley County, Arkansas, which the Bradley County, Arkansas of that day was later divided up into 3 counties. And we have no address other than Bradley County, so we don't know exactly where it was. But anyway, when Arkansas entered the war, or was, seceded and was going to enter the war, they started forming the 2nd Arkansas Infantry over at Helena, Arkansas. Well, he went up and joined. He's 17 years old. And he was in for the duration of the war. He mustered out in South Carolina when the war was over. And he walked back to Bradley County, Arkansas from North Carolina. And he got there and found that his family had moved back to Mississippi. They wasn't in Bradley County anymore. And so he turned around and went back to Mississippi. And they lived there for several years then before they moved to here in Arkansas. And I'll let Loretta start in from there.
And we're not sure, except for the political and the financial situations in Mississippi, we're not sure why they moved to Arkansas. But several of the men came over here, found this land, went back, and about 31 of the extended family came over in a wagon train. He and his wife and their 2 children that were already born. He had married by that time a woman there in Corinth, Mississippi, and then he brought his grandmother, or excuse me, he brought his mother and father, who still had younger children at home, and they're buried right along here, we believe. There's not any markers with them, and we think there was 31 of them, and they settled where Miles lives now. In that same.
Ever since they moved here, there's been a Patton living there ever since, just on that place.
Yeah, so, on that place. Yep. And he farmed, and we talk about him walking so much, but he was in the infantry for 4 years during the Civil War, so he walked the entire time. So, and besides that, after a war, you'd walk to get home, wouldn't you? You wouldn't care. You'd walk to get home.
And I should mention that this unit he was in, I've got the paperwork. I left in the truck because I didn't want it to get wet. But this unit he was in a lot of notable battles. They was at Manassas, they was at Shiloh, siege of Nashville, siege of Corinth, Mississippi, and several more. But several of the bigger battles. And presumably he was there because he was in there the entire time.
And we have the little brown jug sitting here not because they were drinkers. Well, we won't bring that up. One of his sons, Hilly, who was our grandfather, had a sorghum mill during the 20s and 30s to help put his 2 sons through high school. Since there wasn't a high school here, they had to board away. So it cost money to get your child to have an education. So he had a sorghum mill. And that, as far as we know, that's the only jug left from the sorghum mill. The rest of them got shot by .22s and broken. That one does have a hole in it, but it did survive.
Kids will be kids.
Well, I'm not going into that, but I wasn't there, so I don't know. And they pretty much stayed in this community and married into the Miles family, which you'll see on up there later, and married into the Spate family, which you'll see on up there later.
And the Smith family.
And the Smith family, they all married. And we do have, I think we're all notable, but we do have one notable relative. One of his granddaughters married Johnny Cash's brother, and then her granddaughter became Miss Tennessee and then Miss America. So we have a Patton descendant who actually was beautiful and had some talent. Where she got that, we don't know. But
this girl, Kelly Ann Cash, I think her middle name was Kelly Cash, was her dad. Now, of course, it was Cash, but he was a fighter pilot in Vietnam too. So
yes, he also wrote one of Johnny Cash's hit songs. I Remember You.
Hello and welcome. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about Rebecca Holloway, the wife of John Holloway. They John was in the military from 1834 to 1838. And when he got out of the military, he got $40 for being in the military. And so he was out and about, and he spied this little girl named Rebecca, and he was just smitten immediately. And so it wasn't long until she became his wife at the age of 13. And so they was in Fayette, Tennessee, and I do not know what brought them from Tennessee to Hickory Plains, Arkansas. Her maiden name was Briles. There was Briles in this area, but it doesn't mean, I don't know that that had anything to do with them coming here or not. But while here, they had 9 children, and they acquired quite a lot of land. How much, I don't know, but it was quite a lot. And they sold 65 acres out of a 100-acre block here, this is it right here, to build a male and female school. And that tells me that they were very interested in education and development and progress. And so they sold that 65 acres for $100. And at one time also there was a ladies' college at this location too. But I don't know when it collapsed or when it was closed. This is the deed, a copy of the deed, and Rebecca couldn't read or write, and so she had her little X right here where she signed the deed for the 65 acres to be sold. And so I think that they had slaves, and they had like a man and woman. Then they had children, and then their children had children. So they came on down because on his taxes, you know, he had like 3 at 9 years old, 3 at 16 years old, 2 at 10 years old. He had them down to 1 year old. So, you know, it was just this family that had just come out and branched out, and they kept, you know, adding to it. Now then, what they farmed, I don't know. It could have been cotton. There was a lot of cotton, but I think it was timber, because this was all timber here in that time. It was hickory, and so I think it was logging is what he did, and that's what they did for their income. But anyway, I think they found a good place. I think they lived here happily because they acquired the land and raised their children, and perhaps their children got to go to that school some, I hope. And so it was, I think they had a good time here, and they was well liked in the community. And I want to close with just a little tidbit of Hickory Plains, if you don't know this. Hickory Plains was called the hub of a wheel. It was the hub, that was its nickname, and that's because Desart, Hazen, Carlisle, Cabot, and Beebe are all just about the same distance from Hickory Plains. And so it was nicknamed the hub. So
my name is Leon Miles. I live now at Crossroads, which is about 4 miles from here. My great-grandfather was Abner. He was in the Civil War, obviously, and was in the 2nd Tennessee Cavalry, I believe, where he joined up. He was born in Carolinas. I'm not sure which one.
The genealogy records are kind of scarce back then for me that didn't know how to look. I think he traveled around Kentucky and Tennessee for a while, and was in Kentucky when the Civil War started. So he heard, he was not a slave owner or anything, but he was from the South, and he heard that the Union Army was coming through Kentucky and that they were after horses. Well, Abner had a good horse, and so that gave him the reason to leave. He didn't want them taking his horse. So Abner gets on his horse and ends up fighting part of the war, at least, in Mississippi. He had a friend, a buddy, that was, he was actually wounded there, I understand. And he had a buddy that lived in Mississippi. James Jr. was Abner's father. This is the father of him. And Abner, as I told you about the traveling through the Northern Army, getting the horses. One interesting story that I got from my grandfather and father. They didn't ever talk much, or didn't know much, or didn't ever relate it to me, or I probably didn't listen. But anyway, supposedly Abner was riding a horse in the Army and going across some kind of river or stream or something, and the horse couldn't swim, and almost drowned Abner and the horse, but they got him out. But the story that my grandfather and father told me was that the reason he couldn't swim was because he was born in May, and everybody seemed to know back then that a May colt can't swim. That's the story. But anyway, they got him out, and he did okay. He, as I say, he was fought and was wounded in Mississippi. His friend was from Corinth, Mississippi, so he goes home with him, either after the war or right about the time it ended, I'm not sure, but they go home with him. And the friend had a pretty good looking sister, I understand. Her name was Arbella. Arbella was a real Southern lady from all accounts. They had probably had a plantation, and she was someone that was a little higher class than Abner was. Abner had no education, like many in that day, but Arbella did. So anyway, the family wasn't too happy with Abner. He wasn't what they expected for their daughter, but they married, and they left. I guess Abner couldn't stand the pressure, so they left and traveled through Arkansas and Tennessee maybe a couple of times. Ended up in Prairie County, which is this county. About 4 miles from here is where I live now, or somewhere around Crossroads. I'm not sure exactly where. You know where that is. They were in a wagon. Arbella had been traveling in that wagon for a while, and she said, I've had enough of this wagon. I'm getting out. We're going to stop. I'm not going any farther. So they ended up stopping somewhere around Hickory Plains, Crossroads area. So that's how my family, that buried over, a lot of them buried over there, ended up in this area, because Arbella didn't want to go any farther. There's no question about it. Arbella was the bright one of the bunch.
My name is Sarah Smith, and I was married to Silas. Silas was born in 23, and I was born a couple of years after that. We got married in 44 up in Indiana, and we had 10 children. 2 of the boys, William and Charlie, decided that they were going to help the Union cause, and since they were going into the Army, Silas didn't want them to go by themselves, so at 40-some years old, that man mustered into the Army with them in Indiana, in Indianapolis. Well, that was in 44, in October, and then they took part in the battle at Nashville, which was one of the major battles that stopped the progression of the Confederacy. So the Union was able to stop John Bell Hood, because obviously he didn't know what he was doing and he was going the wrong way. So at least that's the story the boys told me when they came home next year in August. So when they came home, we already had 7 children, and the next year little Silas was born, because, you know, Silas had been gone for a little bit. And then we had 2 more children. Our last one was Estella. She was the apple of Silas's eye. She could do no wrong. She was smart as a whip. And that child just, she could do no wrong. So at some point, a few years after the war ended, we decided to come down here from Indiana because we had heard there was a really good school and land was cheap. And with all those children, we needed to farm. So we came down here, we bought some land, and the children went to school here. And 3 years after the war, because we were already here, in '48, on the month of our anniversary in April, a man by the name of John Logan, who was the head of the Grand Army of the Republic, which was the first American Veterans Organization, he decided to start Decoration Day. And he designated the 30th of May as Decoration Day. Well, wouldn't you know that the government had bought some land that the Union soldiers had been encamped on in Little Rock. And when the war was over, they turned that property into a cemetery for the Union soldiers. So when Decoration Day came, this happened a month or 2 before, it was prior to that, they went ahead and my boys decided that they were going to go down to Little Rock. They wanted to see what this cemetery was like and see how many of their comrades were down there. So they trekked on down there to that cemetery and came home, and you know, they had their stories, but if you know how men are after war, they always don't want to tell you everything that went on. So we just sat back and that kind of stuff. And Silas passed on a few years before I did. I managed to make it to the 1900s, and that's my story.
Mr. Thane Wrigley. Not back quite as far as some of the ones that you've been listening to. Mom and Dad are over there in the corner, Thane and Charlotte Wrigley. It started in Chicago, outside of Chicago, about 70 miles. In 1915 is when Dad was born. But we don't know if we're part of the Wrigleys up there. Nobody's invited us to be part of the Wrigley field, so we went on about our lives. Dad farmed outside of Chicago, and when he got in his 30s, he decided to go, you know, fly the coop. So he went to Minnesota to farm, bought a 1,000-acre farm up there, met my mom in a country store where he went to get ice cream every day. If you know my dad, that's gone through the generations, that soft ice cream. He married Mom in about 1949, and at Thanksgiving, he went duck hunting one morning, and in Minnesota, it's very cold. The rivers were frozen, and he fell into the river, Swift River. And he was under the ice, and it took him quite a ways under the ice. This shotgun is what broke the ice finally, and he was able to crawl out of the river and climb up into a cabin that was on the side of the river. It was abandoned, but it had a working telephone in 1949, 1950. Now that just sends chills up my spine every time I tell that story. Wow, Dad wasn't a churchgoer, but he believed. But for that telephone to be there, and he called Mom to come get him, he decided it was time to get out of Minnesota. It's too cold in Minnesota. So he and Grandpa came south one winter looking for grass and looking for a farm. And when they got to BB, somebody said, well, there's a farm over at Hickory Plains, go over there. And he came here and liked it and decided to buy here. And we had 1,080 acres about 4 miles north of Hickory Plains. In 1952, through Daddy farmed and raised 5 kids, and we all worked as hard as he did, and he had a lot of the neighbor kids we built a big house, and they all came. He'd run about 10 kids milking cows and driving tractor and all the farm work that you do. He had 1,000 landrace hogs in the beginning. They're the pigs with the big ears that hang like this. And when we showed them at the fair, we had to use a board because they didn't know where they were going. We just kind of shuffled them around like this. That was too hard to work for one man and a bunch of little kids, so he sold out and took dairy cows. And we did that for quite a few years. He farmed from 52 to 94, and then he turned it over to the boys. And he bought this little country, well, he didn't buy the store, he bought the inventory and ran this for 25 years, the Hickory Plains store. That's where the fruit comes in. My grandma and grandpa went to the valley and had a fruit farm, so he'd go down there to visit, take Mom. Somebody else would run the store. It ran 365 days of the year, never shut. No, never closed the store. Dad worked 89 years, 7 days a week for 89 years. Figure that number of hours out, daylight till dark. And the rest of us learned to work just about that hard. At least Chuck works as hard as Dad anyway. Dad died in 2005. Mom died a few years ago. There's 3 of us still here. And let me check my list.
Tell about how he started out.
Yeah, my grandma and my grandpa divorced in Illinois. And when she had her second child, I don't know if she's still married, I don't know. We don't know about Uncle Bob. We never knew him very much. She gave him away to her sister. And when they went to court to adopt him, they said, what about him going to school? Who's going to take him to school? And the judge says, he's not in school. And they said, he's 10 years old. He was an American Indian, and he looked so young. He always looked younger than what he was. Is that what you were talking about? And then his dad died in a bad wreck on icy roads. A bunch of men were out playing cards and drinking. So we never got to go anywhere when it was icy, and we couldn't bring a beer or any kind of alcohol on the farm because of that. He didn't get to know his dad even after the divorce.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the family name you're talking
Wrigley.
Wrigley.
Wrigley with a W, like Wrigley gum.
Okay, because I seen the name Wrigley.
This quilt has nothing to do with my family, and if somebody wants it, I'd be glad to sell it cheap. Oh, Ernest Hemingway was in my dad's family. My dad's grandmother and Ernest Hemingway's grandmother were sisters, and I cannot tell you much more about that except that it's in my family tree book. I'd have to go back and study it. I forgot to do that before today. But that kind of warms my heart because I'm an educator, so that was a little bit of background that I thought was neat to be close to. I don't know that they ever knew each other. Dad could have cared less. Somebody sitting in the house writing stories all the time instead of out working in the sun.
Lazy.
And
he could tell those stories.
Yes, he could. This is the Griffin family. This is Evelyn. She's representing Henry Griffin, who also, she grew up here right next to where the old store was. I'm going to let you take over. I think I'm finished. Was there anything else I need to talk about?
Great. Thank
you. Thank you for coming.
Well, I'm really William Griffin, and William Griffin came here in William came in 1867.
You stepped on your glasses.
I'll need them to read. And I don't know if they all wore overalls or not, but his great-great-grandson, and he's buried right over here, had to wear homemade overalls. So he never wore overalls when he was an adult, and neither did the generations above him. He came here and homesteaded 160 acres in Edwards, they called it. It's Edwards Community, and it's over on Hickory Plains Creek. Yeah, we have one between that and Cypress Creek. And his wife's not married here because she was an Indian, and that was kind of not something you did. She's buried on the farm, and his grave is over here with some red flowers on it, and it needs a new tomb, new stone. And this plot over here is all the Griffin plot. It's cooler here, so we'll stay here unless you want to go. But the pink flowers are all. It was a hard life for them. Griffin, where they came from, Griffin, Georgia, was probably hard too, but it was really hard here. So they have this, his son is this tall marker, and it shows all those little pink flowers are children who died of whooping cough, measles. One of his sons died of ruptured appendix. I mean, it was just rough. And his son's wife died of the flu.
and left all these little white, little pink flowers there, and the name of 2 of the 4 and 5-year-old little girls who died. So, and in the next generation, they had Dee Griffin, and Dee had, Dee had 5 kids, and they're buried. Some of them here, the oldest and the youngest. The youngest is buried, Claire Francis, she was special needs, and then the oldest, his great grandson, is buried right over there in the Hart cemetery, the Hart tombstone in our cemetery here. And the postmaster here, if you go back up there, you'll see a lot of Harshaws. Did you notice them? A lot of the colored people here have that last name in Holloway, and that tells you pretty well for sure that the old Tenny Harshaw place was a plantation, and they carry the name, and that gives you a clue. It's never been researched or written about. But the Griffins bought the old Tenny Harshaw place, part of it, and sold part of it to the Wrigleys. They were really close friends. And so the Griffin place is still here. And if you see on a little further, you'll see lots of Griffins all the way down to the white chair. One of them, Ruby, you know Ruby Campbell? It was Ruby Griffin. And so her mother's over there, Sally, the 3rd wife. And they were all farmers. And there's some pictures here if you want to, don't know any of them, want to see. I'll just flip through them real fast. This is Henry dressed up, great-grandson, dressed up. Oh, let's see, that's the one that has the tall grave over there. That's the son, 2nd generation.
Now, not every community has a few folks that are not exactly, well, perfect. So let's go meet somebody down here that may not be just exactly church-going perfect.
Come on, gather in here. Welcome to Hickory Plains. How's everybody doing today?
They're a little bit hot.
A little bit hot.
Right up to this. Yes, we are warming up to this place, aren't we?
Well, more specifically, welcome to Prairie County. Now, did you know that Prairie County was once a part of Pulaski County? A long time ago, but I'm so glad. You know why? It's a better name for it, because we got some prairies down that way. So, perfect name for our county, you know. But my name is Eli Ballou, all right? And my family settled this area back when there was martial law in Arkansas. Can you believe that? There was a period of time when we had martial law in Arkansas, but there's something deep to my heart was much worse than martial law, and it's called prohibition. Now, you know, you got them folks up in Washington, they wear their white shirts and their ties, and they go to work every day, and they make some laws. Now, they do make some really good laws for us. We need some of them up there, okay? But what were they thinking on prohibition? What were they thinking on that? So I was thinking, you know, I gotta find a way to make me some. And you're probably wondering what this is. Well, hold your horse. We'll get there in just a minute, okay? So I decided to make a family secret. Well, it became a family secret once I made it, okay? But I'm not gonna tell you what's in this right now, because you wouldn't believe me if I told you. But I'll tell you one little secret. When I get this just right, I cut down some hickory trees from near here, and I put it in a barrel and let it sit there. Not too long, okay? But this one here has been sitting here, I would say, about a year. So this is gonna be some really good stuff. Now, I haven't tried this yet, so I'm gonna give it a try here in just a minute here. And this is the first time I've tried this brew. There we go. Let me just get ready here just a second. Whoa! Let me try again. Oh! Oh, no, that's good. It's good, okay? But I got another story about this thing here, too. Well, it's a little bit about this thing, but
Try you another one.
you know, if you after I tell you what I think's in here.
Be here the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah, now I know some people in town that need gas. Well, come see me, okay? I'll tell you a little about that, and I'll tell you about that gas too. I think I accidentally put a little bit of gas in it, so you don't want this one. But I got something for you. If you want some of this, come to the old Sears Roebuck building. Everybody know where that was? Or where that is? Okay, the Sears Roebuck building right here in Hickory Plains. Come out behind about 8 o'clock. I'll set you up with some of this, okay? And I won't do you wrong, okay? I'll get you a really good price on this, okay? So, you come there, you buy some of this from me, and if you need some gas, let me know ahead of time because I got to prepare for that. I'm not going to tell you my secret on that, okay? But when you come to get some of this behind the Sears Roebuck building, stay a while. We got some of the best fiddle playing and best dancing in the area, all right? So I hope to see you all there, and thank you for coming by.
Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. Gather around, folks. Gather around. See if I can see any familiar faces. We're always looking for somebody to come by to see and visit us. We're lost. We don't know our way home. We made it this far. Some of us come from Texas. Some of us come from Arkansas. We all gathered up the road up here just a piece at Camp Hope, what you folks right now would know was Camp Nelson now. There was probably about 20,000 of us gathered there. And in the fall of 1862, we had a terrible outbreak. Typhoid, measles, mumps, all kind of diseases run rampant. Food was short, folks was dying. We were looking for medical attention anywhere we could. Any skirmish that come up, we'd always looking for a doctor or a hospital. And unfortunately, this township of good folks here in Hickory Plains, Arkansas, they had a hospital set up just across the creek here in the schoolhouse. 2-story schoolhouse. And if I'm not mistaken, there was some surgeries went on in the hospital there a time or two. But they looked after us, and the ones of us that died from disease, they carried us out here and buried us where they couldn't nobody else catch none of it because we was contagious. But we're not lost as long as y'all come by and visit and see us. Looks like a mighty fine crowd around here today. It's good to see you folks. Maybe you'll come back and see us again and we won't be forgotten. We'll always be remembered, even in this bloody war for whatever we fought for. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And he's actually standing on the mass grave.
Really?
Here.
Yeah, it's
right
here.
So how many soldiers were buried here?
Probably about 12 or 15 in the in the mass grave, and then 6 or 7 more in single graves, I think. What Mr. Turner was telling me yesterday. So, it's probably about 25 of us all together.
We appreciate your service.
The tombstones that we're hoping to refinish, rebuild. You can see how they've fallen over. Like I said before, it's $150 to do each one, no matter what size it is.
Oh.
That's what we're raising the money.
Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mary Ann Byram and this is my brother Billy. He was born March 13th, 1831 in Madison, Alabama to Levi Byram and Mary Rigney Byram. Both were 28 years old. They moved to Arkansas between 1850 and 1860 and bought 200 acres of land on the road that is now called Briley Road. Billy, as he was known, had 4 younger siblings, John, Nancy, Henry, and me, Mary Ann. He married Margaret Rebecca Williams on May 8, 1861 in Prairie County. They had 6 children together, Mary Alice, Elizabeth Emmeline, Martha Ellen, the twins Lenny and Francis, and Callie Wiles. It wasn't long before the independence, the War of Independence, which was the way it was known in the South, broke out, and in 1862 Billy joined the Confederate Army, 15th Regiment, where he fought in many battles. One battle was Stones River, Tennessee, known as the Second Battle of Manassas, where he was his younger brother and he fought. Unfortunately, Henry died during that battle and Billy was severely wounded and years later died, but blood poisoning from that wound. He died November 19th, 1874, here in Prairie County at the age of 43, and is buried here in Hickory Plains. Billy and his family are descendants of John Alden and his wife Mary Mullins Alden, and her parents William and Alice Mullins, passengers on the Mayflower that sailed from England to the New World of America in 1620. Levi and Mary Byram, his parents, are buried in a little cemetery on the property owned by J.W. and Judy Gore, not far from the 200 acres that they owned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, my name is Alice Garner. I'm the first and the youngest person to be buried here at the Hickory Plains Cemetery. My father and my mother were the principals and the teachers at the first Hickory Plains Private School Academy, where my mom kept the school open while my dad fought in the Civil War alongside with 65 of the other private school boys, joining the 25th Arkansas Regiment. While my dad was fighting in the Battle of Murfreesburg, my mom kept the school open, kept it living upstairs with my aunts, my two aunts, my mom, and my grandmother. After the battle after they had came home, the Civil War, the school had closed down and became a hospital for the Civil War, where my dad was presumed to be paralyzed, but he did come home, so that's exciting. And even though all of this chaos was going on, and I couldn't be more proud of my parents, because I heard that a couple of their students became really well-known lawyers in Little Rock and a couple doctors in the area. So it's pretty awesome. And well, that's my story. Just the youngest and the first person here to be buried at Hickory Plains School. Awesome, thank you.
William Littleton Moore was born on August the 29th of 1814. His parents were Roy and Ann L. Duty Moore, both natives of Virginia and North Carolina respectively. The couple were married near the line in North Carolina, and Dr. Moore's father cultivated the soil in Virginia until 1806, at which time he moved to Wilson County, Tennessee. Dr. Moore was born there, and the family resided until 1806 in Virginia, and moved to Tennessee, Wilson County, Tennessee, and the father then began to keep the family in sort of prosperity, but he was fought in the Creek War. He advanced to the degree, or to the rank of major, and he led his troops into the Battle of Talladega, and there's where he died. The mother took on the job of rearing the children, and at 1819 she remarried and continued to raise the children, moving them later on to DeSoto and to Bolivar, where she died in 1829. At 14 years of age, Moore entered into storekeeping in order to learn something on merchandising. He studied alternately between working and study, working money to go to school, and he continued to work and study until he was age 21. He received a fair education in English and also in Latin. Then he began studying under John McDonald. He began to study as a doctor in medicine. Later on, he studied under Dr. Alexander Good, who was a prominent physician in that area. He received his first lectures in 1833, 1834, and 1835. He continued to study for 12 years, and he lived in Fayette County, which was on the corner. He was able to practice in Fayette County, DeSoto County, Marshall County, and Shelby counties. For a number of years, he met with a great deal of success there. He was very known and very well liked. In 1853, he moved his family to Hickory Plains, Arkansas, Prairie County, where he continued to live. And in 1862, he joined the Army of the Confederate States of America as a first lieutenant. He was in the 25th Arkansas Infantry, Company C, and he was a totem guard. And their battalion fought in the Battle of Farmington, Mississippi. After that battle, the 25th Arkansas Infantry was reorganized into the 30th Arkansas Infantry, and Dr. Moore returned home to Hickory Plains with his family. He lived in the Hickory Plains area, where he remains today with his wife, Ann. He had amassed a personal fortune of around $1,000 and about $1,500 in real estate. During this time, he practiced his medicine and also as a farmer. He had 360 acres that is southeast of where we stand today. It was later purchased by the grandfather of Doan Turner, who resides here today and is well known in this area. For over 40 years, Dr. Moore was a member of the Fraternal Order of Free and Accepted Masons. All matters received his sanction and support. Dr. Moore was very well known in this area, very well respected as an honest, caring person, not only as a physician, but also as an individual himself, and was a pillar of this community.
And some of us never left. We stayed here. And this is where we'll be from now on. Our home. A home of the unknown soldier. The grave. We were left here, not forgotten, but just a place of rest and peace. A place that we could go and be, and not be remembered, but not be forgotten either.
They say there's 4 unmarked graves. There were 4 killed in the skirmish. I don't know, maybe there's a chance, maybe there's a chance. Those 4 that were killed at the skirmish, maybe some farmer dragged their bodies over here, but they didn't know, they didn't wear dog tags. So maybe they're individually buried, but we don't know. We love, and most of them did die from infection and not from bullet holes, but I'd love to know, but we have no history. And so this was the back side of the original cemetery. We don't know, but we know there are 26 that are marked and unknown amounts that are in that mass grave.
You were out there with the guy, next to the guy with the moonshine?
Yeah.
Okay, so does that explain why you fell out there?
Not really.